And let's jump over to After Effects and bring this in. Actually, the other thing that I've done, if in the real setting, you would have this animation rendered out, batch rendered, and you would have your project with your your layers and your rendered footage and stuff like that. So basically just have 3 folders that are empty currently. What I've done, instead of actually rendering out the kidney, I've actually just made a series of play blast frames. And so into the media folder, I'm going to import those play blast frames. So I'll hit Command I to import. And I'll go to my renders folder. And in the play blast frames, we've got a series of 300 JPEGs that represent what would be our rendered footage. If we sort by name, then we can find a frame 1 easily. So we want to select frame 1, and we want to make sure that this JPEG sequence is checked, so that this is going to interpret this as a sequence of images, which is what it is. So with JPEG sequence checked and the first frame selected, I'll hit open. And now this brings in a single set of media that is essentially a play blast of our kidney just spinning around. And in order to make a composition, the simplest way is just to actually, I don't want to drag this onto the composition icon because it's gonna because it's the wrong size. Because this is a play blast, this has ended up as a really weird pixel format. So what I want to do is just make a new composition and give it the settings myself. So the composition, we'll call this kidney comp, or kidney labeling maybe. And we want this to be, let's see if there's a good preset for us. They don't have, they've always got this 29.97. We don't want 29.97. We want 1280 by 720. We want square pixels. And we want the frame rate to be actually 30 frames per second exactly, because that's what we're using in Maya. So if you ever you just want to make sure that this this is matching your Maya scene. So in our Maya preferences, we've got these settings. We've got the NTSC 30 frames per second, which we've looked at before. So 30 frames per second, and in After Effects 30 frames per second, and so that's good. And the duration, well, we had 300 frames, so that translates into 10 seconds. So there is just a little bit of a funny thing between After Effects and Maya. Maya starts on frame 1. After Effects starts on frame 0. So I'll just hit create, and so we've got this blank composition. You'll notice that there's a time code here, and as we're playing, we've got second 8, 8 seconds and 4 frames, and then it goes up to 8:29, and then at 30 it'll tick over to 9 seconds. So that's the minute second frame format. We also have underneath it a little frame indicator, and if we command clicked on this, then those will switch those displays. So if we wanted to actually see what since Maya uses absolute frames, frame 250 instead of this many seconds, that many frames, we could use that this display, but you have to remember that this is off by 1 frame because we start at frame 0 and we go to frame 299, whereas in Maya we start at frame 1 and we go to frame 300. So that's just something to be aware of. That's not going to affect what we're doing in this class, but if you're if you have to match times between Maya and After Effects, you want to be aware of that. What you can do, you could start on frame 1 and manually set this to start frame 1, but yeah, that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so we've got this composition that's 10 seconds long, and to start out we want to bring in our rendered frames, or in this case our play blast frames. So I'll just drag and drop these in. And because the size is wrong, what I want to do is, because I know in Maya this was supposed to this box here is supposed to represent 720p. So I want to make sure in After Effects that I'm scaling this exactly so that it fits. So I'll hit S to pop open the scale options, or you can just twirl this open and get scale here. And let's just scale this down. And we can get super precise about it, but I'm not going to get super precise about it. I'll just, 89 seems to be pretty close. With this scale down to 89, now we've got this resolution gate that's matching what our rendered frames would be. And of course, if you actually had rendered frames, then this part of the process is irrelevant. You're just going to bring them in and they'll fit on their own. So now that we've got our animation here, we want to bring in our 3D data now. So into this 3D scene, I'm going to import our Maya file. So I'll hit Command-I, jump back up to our class project folder, and in the scenes folder, we had our Maya files. And we want to make sure that we're choosing that AE bake one that we baked the keys out of. And it interprets this as a Maya scene. And so I'm going to hit open. And instead of a file, what it actually brings in is a composition. And we can make sure that we've got the composition settings right. So we've got 300 frames, 30 frames per second, 1280 by 720. That's perfect. And if we double click on it to open it, we can see that we've got our shot cam, we've got our adrenal locator, we've got our ureter locator, and you can even see what the keys are doing because after all, our kidney is spinning around. And so we've got these keys that are the motion paths that are represented of these circles here and a little circle up top here. These, as we talked about before, these null shapes are just little boxes here. And they have this 3D layer enabled, which is what we want. And the shot cam, if we double click on it, we can get to the camera settings, and it should have the settings set up fine for us, but if you needed to change settings for any case, you can actually access them here. But we've got the 35mm focal length, which matches what we had in our Maya scene, and it should all be set up fine. So as I said, the scale is a bit of a problem between After Effects and Maya, and there's a few different ways to deal with it. But I'm going to select both these null objects in the layers here, and I'll hit S, and we can see that the scale is keyed, and it's got a key on every single frame at 100. And that's not what we want, because we actually want to change the scale. So we want to make sure to clear out those keys, because if we just and this is what we did at the beginning of the lesson here, I set this down to 1, but that only applies to a single frame, unfortunately. So what I want to do is I want to click on the stopwatch, and if I click on the stopwatch, it's going to turn off any keys or any animation. And now if I change the scale down to 1, it's going to respect that for the whole length of the animation. Okay, so now we can see, if everything's gone well, that these locators are behaving in the same way and the camera's moving in the same way that it did in the Maya scene, which is fantastic. So the first leader line that we wanted to look at was just a static one. So actually we're not going to worry about this 3D information for the first example. Let's just figure out how to add a leader line in After Effects and worry about the 3D data a little bit later. So in this kidney labeling composition, what we want to do is we want to just add a leader line. And that's pretty simple. We can choose the pen tool. And remember from last time, if we have an object or if we have a layer selected, the pen tool is going to act as a mask. And that's not what we want. I'll undo that. We want to have no layer selected so that the pen tool is going to act as a shape generator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the viewport here, and that's going to create an anchor point. And then I'm going to click one more time over here, and then I'm going to shift click. And the reason I'm shift clicking is to make this perfectly flat and parallel so that we've got this leader line shape. And you can see that this is very familiar to what you would experience in After Effects. It's got a fill and a stroke. We don't want to fill, so I'm going to click on the fill name itself, not on the color, because that'll open up the color picker. I'm going to click on the fill name, and then we get the fill options. And I'll choose this slash that means none. So we don't want any fill on that. Okay. So now we've got a white leader line. I prefer a black one in this instance. So I'm going to click on the stroke color picker and choose black. And we could maybe bump up the width of it, maybe up to 4 pixels or something, make it a bit more visible. And so now if we deselect it, we can see that we've got a pretty nice leader line here. These shape layers that you can see has been generated for this leader line. We could hit enter to edit it, and call this kidney leader, something like that. If we toggle open the contents here, we've got the shape here. And if we wanted to edit it, we would want to make sure that we click the path, and then we've got access to the leader, or to the anchor points, and then we could, or the control points here, and then we could edit those. But there's a lot of other cool options here. Under the stroke, we've got lots of parameters. We could change this, instead of a butt cap, we could change this to a round cap to make it a little bit more sort of rounded. And what we can actually do with this shape is we can add other elements to it. So, for example, if we wanted a black and a white stroke together, we could add another stroke, and that adds another stroke over top of it, and we could change this one to white. Actually, it's white by default, and kind of create this black and white stroke together. I think that looks a bit ugly, but you could play with the different widths and the positions and things like that to make the leader line however you like. We can also add things like round corners, which is going to round off this corner here. You know, again, aesthetic things, but we are digressing. So just a basic leader line. We also want, obviously, text. So we can get the text tool, and I'll click over here somewhere, and I'll type in kidney. And we want this black as well. So we've got the character panel over on the right here. If you don't see that, you can go Windows Character or Command 6 and make sure that that's available to you. So let's choose black here for the text. And, you know, pick a font. Helvetica's nice. Maybe we'll stick with Helvetica. So Command Enter to accept that. And then with the selection tool, I'm going to make sure that this is sitting arranged beside the point here. Maybe let's bump this up a little bit, maybe 40, something like that. Make it a little bit bigger. I actually feel like this is a little bit too long here. We don't really need this quite so long, so I'm just going to drag this in a bit and drag that in a bit, a little more compact. All right, so we've labeled a kidney. So this is fine. We can see that this is static. It's not moving around at all. But as the kidney rotates, I feel like this becomes a little bit awkward, right? The labeling becomes a bit awkward here. So maybe what I want to do is add a little bit of hand animation to this. And the first thing that I want to do maybe is, depending on how we want these things to appear and disappear, is let's make the kidney appear. So let's key the opacity first. And let's start with a kidney leader line. We can hit T to get the opacity. And that's just got a slider from 0 to 100. And 0 means, make sure that's absolutely at 0. 0 means it's invisible. And I'm actually going to Command click to get the alternate timeline style, because I want to think about this in terms of seconds. It's easier to sort of anticipate what the timing of this is going to be, I think, to think in seconds. So that's my preference. So maybe half a second in, so like frame 15, this is going to be invisible. And so I'll key the opacity by clicking on the stopwatch. And so that's going to make a key at 0 at 15 frames. And then maybe half a second later, at frame 1, I want this to be 100% opaque. So I'll drag this up to 100. And automatically, if there is an attribute or a property here in After Effects that has animation on it, you've already created a key. If you move to a different time and you change that property, it's automatically going to create a key for you. That's different to how Maya works. So it's something to be aware of, and you might like that how that behaves. I kind of like how that behaves, but you have to be careful that you're not inadvertently creating keys that you didn't want to. So just something to be aware of there. All right, so we don't want this label to be present the whole time. So I'm actually going to maybe 2 seconds later at 3 seconds. Let's add another key at 100. So we can also add keys if we don't want the value to change by hitting Option Shift T or Alt Shift T, and that'll just create a key at that current time, also at 100. So we've got 0 to 100, staying at 100, and then maybe 15 frames later, half a second later, we'll bring it back down to 0. We also, I think, as I was saying before, the position of this is kind of getting a little awkward here. So maybe what I want to do is at 2 seconds, I'm going to start animating this leader line to be pushing off to the right. And so we want to key the position, so I'll hit P to get to the position, and I'll click the stopwatch here. And that's keyed the position at that point. And then at 3 seconds, right before it fades out, I'm going to drag this, and I'll shift drag it so it's moving only in one position, or in one axis, I should say, out to about there. And so if we play that back, we can just hit spacebar to play it back. Now we've kind of got sort of an interesting effect. I'm going to hide the text for a sec to see how this is working. So it's coming around, and now we kind of get to that point, and it fades out. Actually, maybe what I want to do is I want to make sure that this key is actually over at 15 at when it actually becomes invisible, so it doesn't stop and then become invisible. I feel like that's a little awkward, so I'll move the key over to that point and maybe even move it a little further, something like so. Now let's play it back. Oops, I'll deselect the key just so I don't have that other stuff in the view. Okay, so that's not, it's not perfect, but it's okay. And you can see here that it becomes a little difficult to actually hand animate stuff on a 3D, to match with 3D positions, just because it's difficult to match that motion. But this is okay for now. Let's reveal the text layer as well. We want the text to do exactly the same thing. So what we could do is we could copy and paste the keys instead of doing it by hand. Or what we can do is we can actually parent the kidney to the kidney leader line. And I think that's a little bit more elegant, because if we change the positioning of the leader line, then the kidney will be updated. So in the same way that Maya can do parenting, After Effects can do parenting as well. And we have this parent column here called parent. And we can choose which parent the kidney layer, the kidney text layer, should have. We want to choose kidney leader. And so now if we hit play, the position of the kidney is following along. Oh, but what's going on here? At the beginning, the kidney hasn't respected the transparency of the leader line. And that's because opacity isn't something that parenting relationship brings along with it. So in that case, maybe it's fine to copy the keys. So how do we copy and paste keys? Well, let's hit T to get the opacity preference or attribute here on the kidney leader. I'll marquee select the keys, and I'll hit Command C to copy. And then on the kidney layer, I'll select that, and I want to paste them. But what I want to make sure is that the current indicator, the time indicator, is at the first frame, or the first key that I'm going to be pasting. So if, for example, if I went to the frame 0, and hit paste, you can see that the keys have come in and they're not at the right time. So I want to make sure that my time indicator is there. And a quick way to do that is just to hold shift. And if I hold shift and drag, it'll snap to any keys that are in this animation. So shift and drag, and we snap there. And then now we'll hit Command V and paste that. And now you can see we rewind and hit play, and the opacity is together, and the position is happening together. And so we've got our first leader line label happening.